Hello and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott, and in today's video I'm going to share with you my most recent monster sculpt and tips and tricks for making your production process speed up. And also I'm going to talk about my sponsor for this video, MSI, and the monstrous competition with prizes donated by MSI, which is open from the release of this video. Now this video has been cut into chapters, so check the description for those and all useful links mentioned in the video. So today's sponsors, MSI, best known for their super fast and slick computers for content creators and gamers alike. Now the whole process for building this monster took around a day, but the process was sped up greatly because of the Creator P100X and the Prestige nice big wide monitor that I was using. This computer not only looks beautiful, but it is a beast of a machine. It has a Core i9 10th gen processor, which meant the sculpting process was really nice and smooth. I was able to go nice and high with my resolution and go nice and detailed in the sculpt. And the huge wide monitor made a massive difference to me, and something I should have invested in a long time ago. The size meant I could have lots of reference images open at the same time, my recording software, music apps, and it was really fantastic and definitely was a great influence on my workflow. When doing the final edits, I could have lots of Blender windows open, so I could have front view, top view, render view, along with the shader editor, which was just fantastic. It was a massive time saver. Now you pay more money for this type of machine, but for me it's well worth it, as I don't want the hassle of building my own machine, fiddling about, getting settings to work. I just want something that works smoothly and seamlessly, and this certainly did. It was a real joy. Okay, so how about the monster creation? Well, I started off in Krita, which is my program of choice for digital drawing. It's free, so it's really nice, and it's fantastic. I think I prefer it to Photoshop these days. Now I'm getting used to the tools. I started off by doing a very rough sketch and just sort of going over it, pulling it around. And that's the nice thing about digital drawing. You can kind of just go over your object. You don't have to keep doing lots of thumbnails. I should say the stage before this was looking at lots of reference images, other people's artwork and so forth, even cows' hooves. Well, actually, all hooved animals, they're apparently called ungulates. Lots of images of claws and horns and so forth. As well as, like I say, lots of other people's artwork and see how they've interpreted the idea of these sort of hooven beast creatures. I create a front view and a side view so I can take it into Blender and trace around it. It speeds the process up greatly. So if you want to learn how to draw like I'm drawing here, then check out my new course, Learning to Draw Creating Game Art. So I take those references into Blender and then I just push them off to one side and back slightly and then kind of sculpt in front of them. I'm going to use the skin modifier this time, and I talk about that in a separate video of how you can create base sculpts really easily, so I'll try and remember to put that in the link in the description, but it should be really close to this video in terms of release because it's the next video afterwards. I think it's a really fast way of creating sort of humanoid creatures. Obviously you can just download a human as well, but I don't know, I like getting the shape with the skin modifier. It's pretty fast and quite effective, I would say. Doing things like hands with the skin modifier can be a little bit tricky because of the slight glitches you get, but you just have to sort of move the points around a little bit and you'll be fine and it will start working. So I joined it all together, took a bit of a risk. Really, it's better to separate your object out, I would say, and then you can sculpt with a bit more freedom. And that's in terms of the resolution, because if you have separate objects, you can hide other objects and you don't have to worry too much about going too far for your computer. And obviously I was using this beast of a machine, so I thought I'd give it a go and sculpt it all in one. May have been a mistake. I should have probably separated the head, really. I mean, that was bad practice. The head is where you want to add a bit more detail, and I didn't really have enough detail and couldn't push it as far as I would have liked. So you can see once I've got that base down, I can just start pulling things around, usually using the grab brush. The inflate tool is quite a common one that I'll use just to get that base sculpt in there. I'm often asked questions about, do I need to know anatomy in order to do characters? That's a definite yes. You have to have some understanding of anatomy. And to be fair, my anatomy knowledge is not amazing. You can see I messed up the back quite badly on the next to his sort of tricep and his latimus dorsi. And I probably should have spent a bit more time around there. And the better you know it, the less time you'll take drawing these things out, and the more accurate they're going to look. It's always a bit tricky when you're building sort of beastly creatures and things, and you could argue that, well, the anatomy is completely different for those. Yes, but it's based on a humanoid form, so it just looks odd if they've got like a 20 pack instead of a 6 pack and so forth. But yes, you do go off script and off plan in terms of anatomy, and this guy has super wide shoulders, a really huge neck and a tiny head, but it is based on human anatomy. You don't have to know all the names and things like that, you just have to have a reasonable understanding and a fair bit of practice behind you. It is mainly about practice. The different brushes I'm using, it tends to be the clay strips tool. I'm starting to prefer that. I know lots of artists like the clay strip tool over the draw tool, and I'm starting to prefer it myself. Maybe after a little bit of experimentation and just using it more, I'm kind of getting into it. You have your habits as an artist and your go-to brushes, and that's suddenly becoming my go-to brush. What's difficult when doing humanoid sculpts and anatomy type based sculpts like this is those bits that you can't see very well and you don't see often. So you can't find many reference images of armpits and so forth. It's quite tough. A really good book that I like is Anatomy for Sculptors. It sort of breaks down the human body into different elements and has lots of poses from lots of different angles, so that can really help you out. To be warned though, it's pretty expensive. So for most people, if you don't have a powerful machine, you'll want to separate all these items out into different objects. That way you can set different resolutions for each. Like I was saying, I set one resolution and just kept going up and up. I'm using the sort of remesh workflow rather than any sort of die and topo workflow. The remesh is kind of more powerful these days, so whereas die and topo, if you're changing things, pulling things around, it takes more processing power, so the remesh option is certainly a lot better. And a better route to go down. You'll be able to go to a much higher resolution, as you can see that I'm doing here. I think I'll put the stats up in a moment to show you how far it's gone and things. The workflow I'm doing, obviously I've done the skin modifier and then to the remesh, and I'm just constantly remeshing. Every time I need a bit more detail, I'll just remesh a little bit higher. Once I get to a certain point, I'll retopologize, and I'm using a new tool, the quad remesher, which is absolutely amazing. I'll do a separate video on that. It is a paid for add-on, but I probably should have bought that ages ago as well, because it would have saved me a huge amount of time. I think it was Andrew Price that did a video on don't be cheap as an artist, and there's certainly some truth to that. I am a cheap artist, I can't help myself, I always want to save money, so Critter, Blender, all these tools that are free. But when there's a tool that saves you so much time, it's kind of a no-brainer, the quad remesher. If you are wanting to get into character sculpting, then it's a must-have add-on. But I'll do that in a separate video and go through what it does. It's really cool. Now you can see I've worked on the head slightly there, and that's where I started to have problems with the detail, because if I want to up the resolution and do some nice details on the head, it adds it to the whole body. That's why it's useful to have a separate mesh, especially for something like the head and probably the hands as well, where you're going to add finer details. Now I'm not that high in faces at the moment, but it's important to get down your bulk shape before you start adding any details and going to a really high resolution. If you go to a high resolution and you press the remesh really often, it just takes a lot longer to remesh when you're at a high resolution, so it will slow down your process. Get the shape first and then remesh, and then start doing tiny details so you don't have to keep remeshing on top of that. And some of the bits that you see me doing here may look like they're detailed bits, but actually I'm changing the shape of the mesh a fair bit, so I do actually need to put these in before putting those finer details in. So the finer details being things like, I don't know, veins or even wrinkles or cuts and lumps and so forth. But all the spikes and the horns, they're still sort of major details that you need to sort out on a lower resolution before going into the higher resolution. And like I say, and I can't stress it enough, if you go too high a resolution too early, you'll have to keep remeshing. The remesh will take ages and it will really slow down your whole workflow. You don't want to keep remeshing on a high resolution. You can see here that I'm on 800,000 faces, which again for this computer isn't anything difficult to handle, but I can go to the grab brush nice and easily, move big parts of the mesh if I need to. So I'm making those sort of big fundamental changes on a fairly low resolution, or what is a low resolution for this particular machine. Okay, so what I'm doing here is using the quad remesher. It's a really cool tool, like I've been saying, and it's one button and it's remeshed to a pretty good standard. Now there are tools like Instant Mesh, which I have a video on, which is a free version of this you could call it, but it's obviously not as good. But of course you can check out my video on that. The really great thing about this is you can then go to the multi-resolution modifier, add a multi-resolution on top, start sculpting on that with loads of fine detail, and it's really great. I actually learned a bit about this from Zacharias Reinhardt and CG Boost's new video about sculpting, well worth a look at. It goes into more detail than I am here. I'd seen a lot about the workflow before, but hadn't realised how far it had come, and it really seems a lot more powerful these days than it used to be when I first looked into it. But because I've done a basic retopper with the quad remesher, I'm able to add that multi-resolution modifier and add this nice lot of detail, and it's really great. Also, what I can do is I can shape this in terms of adding a rig to it, which you'll see later on. And I can kind of add the rig to the low version of the multi-resolution modifier, and it won't lag and be a pain. And then when I come to render, it shows the high version. It's like having a displacement map or a really highly detailed normal map on your object. So it's well worth doing it with that workflow. Again, check out CG Boost's video on this, link in the description for more details. I'm doing it a slightly different way. He used the pose brush and things like that. I'm going to use a rig, and yeah, it's just slightly different, but you'll get the idea from his video, which is fantastic. Also, he has a really excellent sculpting course which he's updating at the moment. I would thoroughly recommend that also. Again, I'll try and remember to put all these links in the description. If I don't, then someone can remind me, please. So now that I've got that multi-resolution on there, I can go in and do things like the veins and sharpen up areas like the horns and so forth. For the veins, I'm using the draw sharp, and I'm reversing it, so you hold down Control to reverse a brush and then sort of drawing out the veins. And I use the sort of reverse draw sharp and the draw sharp much more when I get to this sort of detailed version. Now this is the really fun bit, I think. You can really add to your mesh by going and getting some alphas. These alphas I picked up from all over the place, but there's Pixelogic has a site which has quite a lot of them, so sort of ZBrush alphas and stuff like that if you want to look them up. And you can just find an alpha and then kind of draw it onto your object, and you add these nice fine details. It really brings your shapes to life rather than being this sort of really sort of smooth outline. It breaks everything up, adds life, character and all sorts to your models. There is a limit though with this, and you can really go overboard. Sometimes you might want to go overboard and add just sort of silliness to your shape, but generally you have to be a bit careful with how you use them. Change the strength regularly, and different areas require different strengths. So if I've got a sort of crease skin type thing and it's on a big part of the model, I might want to break that up lots, and yet in the hands and fingers I want it to be really fine and small and therefore have less strength. So not only the size you're varying, but the strength as well. And you can really add, like I say, a lot of character with this sort of idea. Try not to rely too much on one type of brush here as well, otherwise it becomes very uniform over the object. Vary the size a lot as well, like I say, because it can look repeated and you don't want that repetition. You want this sort of organic looking shape. I'm using lots of different brushes, rock brushes and reptile brushes and things like that to break things up and make them look all weird. It's very important that you only go to this section once you've got the shape down. If you haven't got a good base model, then no amount of this sort of minor detail is going to make it look better. You really need a good base, good proportions, and then go to these detailed stages once you've done all those slightly more laborious tasks. And like I say, this can be massive fun. Your character really comes to life, and you can really go to town on this. It's a really quick way of sculpting, adding character, and like I say, massive fun. And you don't have to stick to brushes that are particularly for your object. So like I say, I'm using rock brushes, a crack brush here to suggest there's cracks in his skin and he's breaking apart slightly, and I think variety is the key here. So once I'm fairly happy with my shape, and I probably could have taken this a lot further, but I was running out of time, I then go in and add a really basic rig. You can do this with the pose brush, and in CG Boost's video he does it with a pose brush. I had to go with that, but I found this method much easier. If you're using the multi-resolution modifier, it's a nice way of doing it. If you've got a really high complex mesh and it hasn't got a multi-res on it, so you need that low version of the multi-resolution mesh to attach the armature to make it nice and easy, otherwise it will be laggy. That's when you might want to use the pose brush with very high resolution meshes. But this has a base mesh which is low resolution, hence the multi-resolution modifier as I keep talking about. This bit with the eyes I could have probably gone a lot further with, and I should have done this earlier in the sculpt. I'm kind of running out of time at this point. I did dedicate a day to this. It's taken longer in a sense because I'm sort of doing other things around it, so it's difficult to judge whether it was just one day. But running out of time, so you just have to go for these things. It's often the case in production. When you're working for a studio, you have a time limit and a set time that you need to get these things done by, so you have to say it's finished at this point, even though you feel it might not be. And that's a problem we have as artists. We're often perfectionists to a degree, and we want our things to look the best as possible, but you have to say when something's finished at a certain point. You just can't get away from it. I did want to texture the model as well and paint it, but yes, I ran out of time. But there it is, the finished model. I'm quite pleased with it. It was good fun, and it certainly was made easier by this lovely computer and beautiful monitor that I was sent by MSI. So what about the competition? Well, the title is The Beast Within, which is a reference to this beautiful machine that I've been using. It does look lovely, but it has an absolute beast within it. You'll need to create a piece of artwork that best depicts this in some way. It can be scary, or a beast, or a monster, maybe something more elaborate and subtle. Points will be awarded for technical skill and creativity. The top 5 will be shown in the results video here on this channel, and that'll be a day after the competition deadline. I might choose a few others, honourable mention, to go within the video. We'll see how it goes. The closing date is the 4th of April, 12 midnight, Greenwich Mean Time, so GMT. The top 3 will get prizes. There'll be a drawstring bag, an MSI lucky keychain, an MSI t-shirt. But the main thing is to have fun. As always, the main idea of the competition is more about the community aspect, having a goal and having something to aim for. So check out other people's work and give them a thumbs up, especially to your favourite, as that might influence my decision slightly. How do you enter? Well, go across to the Discord server, links in the description. Make sure you place the competition entries within the competition channel. And always, the main thing is just taking part, getting involved and improving your skills. So hopefully you enjoyed the sculpt. Look out for the competition entries on the Discord server. Thanks for all your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.